Hello and welcome to another edition of Ecosphere. I am Mary Kanu. A historic deal was struck at the United Nations COP27 summit that will see rich nations pay poorer countries for the damage and economic losses caused by climate change. Now, this is good news as it ends almost 30 years of waiting by nations facing huge climate impacts. But developed nations were left dissatisfied over progress on cutting fossil fuels. This year's talks in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, came close to collapse and eventually overran by 2 days. But the loss and damage deal could be the most significant development since the Paris Agreement. Now, to give better insight into what this still means for developing nations is Desmond Majakodumi, environmental expert. Thank you very much for joining me on the program. This deal has been called many names. It has been called historic, but what are your views on the deal in terms of the compromises made and your doubts around the deal?
Well, there are a lot of positives. One of the biggest positives to my mind is that the Africans were able to, come together with a unified voice and, demand from the industrialized, developed world compensation for the terrible damage that has been done in the process of industrialization. And this was very, very encouraging. There were some good voices of support coming from some of the Western leaders, like the Secretary General of the United Nations, like Al Gore, the former Vice President of the United States, who is a very, very strong climate advocate against climate damage, climate change, and all that. So that was very, very encouraging. However, the reality is that it's not enough. And in fact, these funds were dedicated specifically for adaptation, that is, amelioration of the damage that has been caused and to adapt ourselves to the problems of extra flooding, desertification, and all this sort of thing. However, you wouldn't need to be applying massive amounts of adaptation funds to vulnerable countries, especially in Africa, if they listened to the science decades ago, or even 15 years ago. And the science was saying that we are causing irreparable damage to our life support system. Let me repeat that. Irreparable damage to our life support system. Okay? That's what the science was unequivocally saying decades ago. And that we need to stop causing that damage. The major aspect of it being this massive amounts, hundreds of millions of tons of a particular greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide, into the atmosphere. Well, the scientists said it, but the world didn't listen. And we just continued pumping and pumping and pumping these hundreds of millions of tons of CO2 greenhouse gas into the atmosphere, and then the damage started to come. And this is what the funds are now for, to help us to be able to manage the damage. And that's not enough, because the cause of the damage is still on. And in fact, in the COP meeting, there were strong arguments in favor of continuing the damage. So it's extremely worrisome. And why is it so extremely worrisome? Because there comes a point in time whereby we will not be able to reverse the process, okay? Right now, we can reverse it. We can stop it from becoming irreversible, a process that will eventually, in a matter of just decades, give catastrophic consequences. I mean, look what's happening now. Look what's happening now when we haven't even reached that particular, what they call the tipping point. It's a certain amount of heating that the earth will reach, whereby it triggers off other releases of greenhouse gases, okay, from the methane, from ice caps, and so on and so forth. It's quite complex, but it's also very, very short, okay? So we haven't even reached there, okay? And see what is happening with the environment now. Nigeria experiencing some of the worst floods that have ever been recorded. Pakistan, likewise, the UK reaching highest temperatures that have ever been recorded, and so on. And this was all predicted by the scientists. So we haven't even reached there yet. So we need to put all our efforts to preventing ourselves from reaching there, not just having money to repair the damage that this will cause. Because when we reach that tipping point, there's no amount of money that is going to alleviate the problem. So in this case, it's certainly better to prevent.
Well, I know you mentioned that the financial commitments are not enough and seem to be an adaptation method, but would you say the financial commitment is the start of something that can be called a good deal to get developing nations the climate justice they deserve?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's yeah. I agree entirely. At least it's a start. It's a start, but it's a very, very late start, and they need to move a lot further forward than that. And the challenge that we're having now is that, we have a very strong argument that you people were able to industrialize by using all these fossil fuels that fast-tracked your energy requirements for industrialization. And this is what helped you to move yourselves forward in the whole process of development and so on. And now we in Africa, who you don't want us to be using our own fossil fuels. What's all that about? So there's a strong argument there. And that's why I'm saying it's not enough just to give money for adaptation. There needs to be massive amounts of money made in order to help us to transit, to go into clean energy systems. And the hypocrisy of the West, it has to be subdued. It has to be gone. This is not the time for hypocritical actions, hypocritical statements. This is a reality that humanity has never, ever faced before. Okay? It's not that, things are going to get a bit hot. We're going to have a few bad floods here and there. Oh, how very sad. No. Why do you think the Secretary General of the United Nations said what he said, which is that we're in a vehicle going down a road leading to climate hell and our foot is still on the accelerator? Or the one he said previous to this meeting, mankind is waging war against nature, and this is suicidal because nature always fights back. He's just quoting from the science. So yeah, it's a nice little step in the right direction, but it's certainly not enough. We need to get major funding. There has to be a transformation, a societal transformation. There has to be, in fact, there is a change coming. Okay, either nature imposes that change on humanity in a catastrophic way and wipes out civilization and even threatens the very existence of humanity. I mean, species have come and gone on this earth. We are a species. We are a very advanced species in terms of the knowledge of technology and so on we have. Unfortunately, we have not been advanced enough to evolve enough to use this technology responsibly enough to stop the nonsense that we're doing, particularly against nature and our life support system. So yeah, either nature knocks us out or we have, which would be extremely painful. God forbid my children and my grandchildren have to go through that, hundreds of millions of people in internally displaced people's camps and so on. Or we ourselves have a renewal of our minds and change our attitudes and stop putting profit ahead of people and ahead of planet. That's what the armed robber does. He puts profit ahead of people. So it requires radical changes, but it is a nice step in the right direction, but we need more than a step now. We need a leap in the right direction. And that will require tremendous amounts of funding to come into our coffers so that we can transit to clean energy systems. And of course, one.
Well, since you mentioned the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, please give us insight into what he said about the climate being in climate emergency mode. Now, how do we get out of this mode, seeing that there are climate skeptics in Africa? Can we ever get out of this mode?
Well, the first thing we have to ask ourselves is the United Nations just one small, little, nonsensical organization? Or is it the biggest gathering, the biggest world group of nations, of all the nations of the world put together? When the UN has a General Assembly, 99% of the leaders of every nation on this planet go to that General Assembly. And if they can't make it because of some terrible circumstances in their home, they will send the highest of representatives, okay? So that is an organization to be reckoned with. On top of that, they have access to all the latest science. They have access to the World Meteorological Organization. They even set up an international panel for climate change, which reviews on a constant basis all the information coming in from climate scientists all over the world. They have access to pictures from space. The Secretary General of the UN can pick up the phone and say, what was the average temperature in Lagos, Nigeria in 1973? Boom, he gets it within seconds. He can ask for a picture of the Sahara Desert 40 years ago and a picture of the Sahara Desert 40 minutes ago. Boom, he gets it like this. He is one of the top civil servants of the world. And I can assure you that there is no way a fool is going to be able to get into that position. And if you recognize that the Secretary General of the United Nations cannot be a fool, then at least you're thinking sensibly. Now, if the Secretary General of the United Nations, based on the science, the massive amounts of data and science that he has available, is warning us that we must stop the pollution immediately, and we must transit to clean energy as soon as possible, even though it will shake a few economies, but we've left it far too late, and that we must start caring far more for nature. Now, if he, a person that we acknowledge is not a fool, is giving us this advice, and we are still being skeptical and denying it, the question is, who then is the fool?
Well, I'm afraid we have to go on a break now. Well, we'll go on a break now, but when we return the program, we'll continue. Just stay with us. Welcome back on this edition of the program. We're looking at what the loss and damage deal made at COP27 means for developing nations. We still have Desmond Majakodumi, an environmentalist, on the program. Now, before we went on the break, you talked about fossil fuel, and there was talk at the summit about phasing down fossil fuel, and this elicited resistance from oil producers and big emitters. The resistance has brought up the question of if the world can ever put an end to emissions which depletes the ozone layer, or at least reduce it drastically. Do you ever see this happening?
It has to happen. It has to happen. It's like, if you're if you're in a big house with your family and the house starts to catch fire and you have your fire extinguishers, but maybe you spent a lot of money on those fire extinguishers and you don't, the money, you don't want to waste your money. So you refuse to use the fire extinguishers to put out the fire. Eventually, your house will burn down and the fire will eventually go out because it's exterminated the cause of the fire. This is how serious the whole thing is. There is a timeline. We have literally between 8 to 12 years to stop this massive pollution of the atmosphere. And remember, we're talking of hundreds of millions of tons of this CO2, most of it as a result of burning the fossil fuel. If you don't believe that fossil fuel is poisonous, I wouldn't advise you to try it, but the test would be carry a small generator into your studio and spark the generator. You won't stay in the studio. So it's a no-brainer. It's something that has to be done, and understandably, a lot of the nations will resist it because this is, has been such a tremendous revenue source for them. And unfortunately, some of the nations, including ours, have not used that revenue judiciously. Like Norway, for instance. For decades, Norway was selling oil, but invest in the oil. So Norway has a massive sovereign wealth fund now. If she stopped selling oil tomorrow, she could draw down from that sovereign wealth fund and be very, very okay. Nigeria has not been able to do that. We've been able to accumulate tremendous debts instead. So there's a lot of challenges for a lot of nations that have been relying on fossil fuel. Luckily, our dear nation, Nigeria, has tremendous other resources. We have so much under the ground that the whole world needs, not to mention just our agriculture.
Well, sorry to cut you here, but some African nations have insisted they deserve to exploit natural gas reserves in order to fight poverty. Now, with Africa's level of dependence on fossil fuels, is facing down fossil fuel good or bad news for Africa?
It is good news for the world, and Africa is part of the world. So, whatever happens in Italy, in the atmosphere of Italy, can affect what's going on in Africa. Likewise, vice versa. So, yeah, phasing down. I mean, eventually what will happen is, the young people of the world are waking up to this lunacy that the elders have been, indulging in for far too long. The transition should have been made ages ago. And the reality is that, solar power is fantastic. It's just there's been very little research done on solar cells. And I can assure you that with the way the research is going now, in no time at all, within just a few years, you'll be able to power your electric car with just a few high efficiency photovoltaic cells on the roof of the car and on the bonnet and the boot, and also the windows, because now they've developed solar cells that are like glass. They're transparent, but they're still generating electricity. The storage systems are being improved tremendously. So it's just a matter of allowing the research to be done in the clean energy systems. And we in Africa have over 400 times. We have hundreds of times more solar energy potential than we do fossil fuel potential anyway. So yeah, the phasing out is going to happen anyway. We're lucky that we still have a little window of opportunity, and the natural gas, people say it's a transition fuel. Well, if it's transmitted and if it's pulled out of the earth in a very, very good way with minimal of leakages, it is far better than burning petrol or diesel. But unfortunately, you have a lot of leakages and so on. So it's still a fuel that causes damage to the environment. And again, let's remind ourselves, we call it environment, but it is our life support system. So how can you, in your right mind, do something that is harmful to your life support system? And then this is what makes it even more pertinent. And we can even bring it into scripture, because it's not just my life support system or yours, it's our children's life support system. So on what basis can we possibly justify doing something, no matter how profitable it might be, that is going to cause irreparable, irreversible damage to my children's life support system? And why am I an adherent of any of the major religions which tell me very, very clearly that God who created the heaven and the earth has put us here as caretakers, as people who are supposed to replenish this earth, who are supposed to be stewards of the creation. And we're destroying the very creation that he put us in charge of when he told us that we must love him above all else and love our neighbor. This is our expression of love to God who has given us this miracle of creation. This is an expression of love to our children. Come on. I believe that we shall wake up from this horrendous slumber and do the right thing as soon as possible.
Now, finally, before I let you go, from the discussions at COP27, what are your views on what this year's meeting revealed to you in terms of the global commitment to curbing emissions and the obstacles we still face to progress?
It showed us that we have a long way to go. The positive side, as I said earlier, is that at least the African nations were able to come together with the support of the European Union, was very supportive. So the very, very big silver lining on this terrible dark cloud is that, well, you know, humanity, you're now coming to the realization far too slowly that you have to come together as humans with a common cause, because we have a common problem that will cause catastrophic consequences against us if we continue this way. And what way are we talking about? We're talking of the negativity that we have continued to express, not just against ourselves, you know, wars and all type of terrible things against each other, but also against nature. And the difference being that nature must give you back what you give her. You sow a seed and you will harvest the fruit of that particular seed. So there's a realization now coming into humanity that, hey, we're all brothers and sisters in this one tiny little marble of a planet, the miracle of creation, and we need to live far more harmoniously with her and express far more love and care and concern for this wonderful miracle of nature. And by default, this is an expression of love and care and concern for ourselves. And we will learn through this to really become our brothers and sisters.
Well, all right. Now, Desmond Majakodumi, environmental expert, thank you for your contribution. Well, that's how much we can take on this edition of the program. Thank you for watching. I am Mary Kanu.